Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and welcome to the end of 2023 and the series of videos I do at the end of each year summarizing my reading year. And in this video we're talking about my anticipated releases of 2023 and whether I actually read them this year. Strap in, we have a lot of books to talk about. In January I was anticipating many books. I feel like at the beginning of 2023 there are a lot of books in the first 6 months that I was aware of that were coming out, so I have a lot more books in the beginning of 2023 that I was excited about than towards the end, just because towards the end of the year it's a little further out. I just don't have as much information about the second half of the year. So in January we had many anticipated releases. What I am going to attempt to show you on the screen is my very messy Excel spreadsheet of my anticipated releases. If you are here, have been here for a while, my 2022 anticipated releases were written on a yellow legal pad piece of paper that I stashed away and like folded up, crumpled up, and lost for a while and then found again. And so this is a little bit more organized, but it's still not the most aesthetically pleasing. This is organized by release date, and also I color coded it, so if something is highlighted in green, that means I can access it from my library. Because I use my library so frequently, I wanted to see if I could get some of these anticipated releases from the library instead of having to go out and buy them. And there are certain things that I couldn't do that with, that just weren't available, so those unhighlighted ones are things that I had to purchase myself or I wanted to purchase for myself. This spreadsheet is organized, it's not very organized, but it does say the author, the title of the book, what month it's releasing in, whether or not I read it, the star rating if I read it or DNF'd it, and a few notes about the book if I read it or what I knew about the book going into it. The first book that I have to talk about is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, the first of the Brandon Sanderson secret projects. He had 4 secret books that he wrote during the pandemic that he was releasing quarterly in 2023. I've read all 4 of those books. Tress is the first one. I loved this. This is a 5 out of 5 stars for me. This is my personal favorite of the secret projects. This is like a cozy fantasy Princess Bride sort of retelling, where instead of the Princess Bride getting left behind, she goes on the adventure to save her beloved. And this was wonderful and whimsical, and I absolutely adored it. This one is crossed out because this was originally an anticipated release. This is called The Death I Gave Him by M.X. Liu, and this is a sci-fi Hamlet retelling. And last year I read a Hamlet retelling and really didn't like it, and so I was kind of excited to see a sci-fi twist to it. However, after seeing a couple of reviews on this one, I was just like, you know, since I didn't have a good time with that previous Hamlet retelling, and based on some of the reviews I'm seeing, this probably just isn't a book for me. This is a type of retelling I'm not going to enjoy because I just find Hamlet an insufferable character and really hard to root for. Then we have Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. Anything by Talia Hibbert writes, anything she writes, I'm gonna read. And this is her YA romance debut, and this was fabulous also. For a person who dislikes young adult and dislikes young adult literature and didn't even like young adult romance when she was a young adult, I really thought this was charming and sweet and cute and incredible for a young adult romance. The representation is awesome. The disability representation is awesome. The queer representation is awesome. This is just a really fun, and I hate to say incredible, but this is a really incredible story, and I'm glad I read it. Deep as the Sky, Red as the Sea by Rita Chang Epig. This is also releasing in January, and unfortunately I didn't get my hands on this. This is a fantasy historical fiction about a lady pirate, the most infamous lady pirate in history, I believe, who sailed the South China Sea. And pirates are great, but I just haven't gotten to this one yet, and I hope to. It wasn't available at the library for a long time. It might be now, but at the time I was looking to try and read it, it was not available. So this is still on my list to read. Infinite by Ada Hoffman. This is the third book in this series, and I haven't even read the second one, and I put this on the list thinking that I would get to the second book of this series this year and then read the third one and finish out the trilogy, but I didn't. And the first book in the series is incredible. It's so good. It's really twisty and weird. It's a sci-fi horror thriller, and the main character is an autistic scientist, and it gets wacky and weird, and I really enjoyed it. But I just let this series fall by the wayside, so I really need to probably reread the book one, because it's been like 2 or 3 years now, and then finish out the series. So oops. An odd addition to this list was City of Nightmares, and this is a young adult horror, or at least I thought it was a young adult horror. This is more like a young adult adventure story, and this is about like people turning into their worst nightmares and dealing with the theme of fear and letting go of fear. And there's a vampire love interest. And this is a young adult, so this is super fast paced and very silly and wacky. There's like talking politicians that are dinosaurs and reptiles and humans and, you know, mythical creatures coexisting. And this was just a lot of fun, and I think I gave it like 3.5 or 4 stars because it was just such a silly, goofy time. And I think I will read the sequel whenever that comes out, or it might have already come out, but I definitely want to see the conclusion of this series. And we have God Killer by Hannah Kaner, and unfortunately this is a DNF for me. I did not finish this. I was like 30% in and just was bored because the premise does not match what the book actually is. It does, but it doesn't. So this book is about a woman who kills gods for a living. She's kind of a mercenary, and gods have been outlawed in this fantasy world. And so she goes around killing the illegal gods. But so like that's kind of the premise, but there are like 4 other points of view in this story, and it's kind of an adventure tale. And so I was anticipating following this one main character, and then we get other points of view, and I just wasn't feeling those at all. And the point of view of the God Killer, I was like not super interested in her either, so for me it just wasn't worth continuing to invest time into. In February we have The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi, and I loved this book. I did read it. I gave it like 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is a great adventure story of getting the band back together. This retired infamous pirate has to go on one last adventure and get her old crew back, and this was wonderful and I loved it. Cage of Dark Hours is the sequel to The Helm of Midnight, and I did read this and I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't as good as the first one for me, but I did really enjoy my time. This is like a fantasy horror. I put that in quotes because there's like one horrific scene in book 2. The first book is much more horror driven. There's a serial killer in that one, which is, you know, gruesome and horrifying. But in the second one, we kind of get away from that, and there's like one scene that's pretty horrifying, but other than that, it's mostly a straight up fantasy. Wasn't quite what I wanted the sequel to be, if that makes sense, but I still really enjoyed my time reading it, and I will continue and finish out the trilogy. A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon is a DNF, and this is unpopular. I'm glad so many people enjoy this, but Samantha Shannon, this is the 3rd book I've read by this author, and I've just decided she's not an author for me. I do not like her writing style, or the way she paces her characters, or the way she paces her plots, and the way she writes her characters is very distant for me personally. Another DNF, but this is like a temporary DNF, is The Writing Retreat. This is a closed door, snowed in type thriller, and I think I literally just like started it and then like 5 minutes later stopped it. So I do want to get back to this one. I think I just wasn't in the mood for a thriller at the time. I'm kind of picky about like when I read a thriller, and I will pick this one back up. It just like wasn't the time. So no shade, no tea. I will hopefully get back to this one. Wild Massive is a epic sci-fi, and nothing to it. I just haven't gotten around to this one and haven't been in the mood, I guess, for sci-fi. I've read less sci-fi this year than I wanted to, but this is still on the list. Hopefully I'll get to it. Our Share of Night is a horror book, and I DNF'd this one, and I really wish I liked the writing of this and like the direction it was going, but it's kind of black magic-y, and I just, for some reason, hate that in horror books. I don't know why. Every book I've read that has like the twist is black magic, dark magic, it's just, it feels like a cop-out to me. It feels dumb. And it's maybe because I'm such a fantasy snob. Like, that's probably what it is. But I just don't like black magic in my horror books, and this is what this was. Like, and it's right away in the beginning, so that's not really a spoiler. So I just was like, nope, this is just not gonna be a horror book for me. In March, we have The Moth Keeper. This is a graphic novel by this author who I've enjoyed in the past, and I just haven't gotten around to it because the wait for this one is incredible at the library. A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher was a 3-star read, 3.5. 3-star read. This was kind of disappointing for me. This is another horror book from this author, and it just wasn't very scary to me. I think this author's best horror for me is The Hollow Places, which was terrifying and had a very similar feeling to this one. So House with Good Bones wishes it could be The Hollow Places, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people were disappointed in this one, but it was just okay. Like, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great for me either. The Lies of a Jungo is a fantasy novella, and I don't think this was available at the library, so that's one of the reasons I haven't gotten to this one yet. And we have Lone Women by Victor LaValle. Now, this is a historical fiction horror, and I read a different horror book by this author this year and really was not impressed. I really didn't like it. So this one is still on the list to read, but I'm not like jumping at the bit to read it. And I've also heard like middling things about this one. This is about a woman who travels west with a trunk, and she basically tells people never to open the trunk. So you're like, oh, what's in the trunk? And that's like the whole point of the book, is like, you know, her trying to make a name for herself and escape her past, and you're trying to figure out what her past is, essentially. And we have April, which is another Brandon Sanderson secret project. This is secret project number 2, the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England, and this was a disappointing read for me. It was fine. It was, again, a 3-star read. Not my favorite of the secret projects, or probably one of my least favorite Brandon Sandersons. That's it. Then we have Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. I did read this. I gave it like 3 stars, but like a good 3 stars. This was my book club pick for my sister's book club that I do with my siblings in real life. And this is a kind of a revenge story about this woman who is basically a hunter with this giant bird, and she hunts manticores for a living. And it was okay, like, but it didn't, the writing is beautiful, first of all, but it just didn't evoke enough in me to super care about the plot, if that makes sense. Like, so I again I love Fonda Lee, and so I give this book like all the accolades, but it just like didn't work for me as a fantasy story, if that makes sense. Very well written though. Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh has been on my anticipated releases for 2 years. In 2022, this book got pushed to 2023, and I picked it up, and this was a DNF after getting past the trigger warnings. There were so many trigger warnings in this book that I got scared, and I was like not in a good place at the time to handle those particular triggers. So this is like a queer sci-fi epic, but I just couldn't handle it at the time. So this is again like still on the list, but I'd have to be in the mood for something this dark, seemingly. Like I didn't even get to chapter 1. I just was like, nope, I can't at the moment. The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown, I did read, and this is a short novella sci-fi horror. And this was really good. I give this 4 stars. This had me kind of at the edge of my seat. This was a really good sci-fi horror, and I really like that subgenre a lot. And this was a particularly good one. So I highly recommend this one. In May, we have An Island Princess Starts a Scandal by Adriana Herrera, and this one was a 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is a little disappointing for me because the first book in this historical romance was a 5, and I absolutely loved the first one, and the second one just kind of fell flat for me. There were certain things about the third act conflict and the resolution of that conflict that bothered me, and then I think the romantic development was a little lacking. There was a lot more focus on the hot and heavy stuff, if that makes sense. So this one just like didn't quite hit the same note as book 1, sadly. Then we have Rose House by Arkady Martine, and I don't even know if this came out this year, but Arkady Martine wrote a duology that I absolutely am obsessed with, and so I was like, whatever else they write, I'm gonna like read immediately, and I haven't seen this like floating around anywhere, so I don't even know if this came out this year. I can't find it at the library, so maybe I'm just misinformed, but there it is. There's this. I obviously haven't gotten to it. Also in May, we have The Court of Undying Seasons, and this is a young adult vampire fantasy romance, I will say, and I really liked this. This was like a 4-star read. This is one of my favorite vampire romance novels I've read in a long time, and this is young adult, so maybe that's why it's a 4-star instead of a 5-star, but I think this had fun and interesting world building and an interesting spin on vampires, as well as an interesting and well-developed sort of enemies to lovers romance in it. And this was also pretty queer and queer normative in the vampire world. Lots of trans characters, lots of same-sex couples, or you know, all of that was really well done in my opinion. And so I thought this was a great time. I think A.M. Strickland I trust because she also wrote another young adult fantasy with polyamory and queerness, and really loved that one too. So I trust in A.M. Strickland. Even though they are primarily a young adult writer, I will keep reading them because I just really like what they do and how they pull off these interesting and fun concepts. Water Outlaws is a queer fantasy, lots of martial arts. That's kind of what I have on my notes here, and I just haven't got to it, and it was not available at my library at the time of trying to read it and the filming of this video. So hopefully I can get my hands on it somehow and read it, because this still really interests me, and I really think the cover just pulls me in. The Blighted Stars by Megan O'Keefe. Megan O'Keefe wrote a trilogy, a sci-fi, space opera, epic, fun, fast-paced adventure trilogy, and I really enjoyed it. This is the first book in a new series from her, and I just haven't gotten to it because here's a petty reason. I wanted to listen to this on audio, and they only had the ebook at the library, and so I'm pouting about it. The Surviving Sky by Kritika Rao came out in June, and this is another sci-fi story, and this gives me major Broken Earth vibes from the cover and the synopsis. It's kind of a dystopian fantasy sci-fi mashup, and I'm really excited to get to this one, but again, it wasn't available at my library, and I'm like, I'm dying. This is the one that I'm like dying to get my hands on, and really like, this is a priority read for me. I think this sounds so cool and looks incredible. Blood Over Bright Haven by Emma Wang. This is the author that wrote The Sword of Kaigen, and this is not available at the library, which is the main reason, and the other reason is you can only buy this book from Amazon. either the ebook or the physical book. And I just really don't like supporting Amazon. I'm gonna have to get over it if I want to read this book. I had to get Sword of Kaigen through Amazon as well. So it's not outside of what this author already does to publish her work. I just really hate supporting Amazon. So this is again a top priority read. Like, I'm so itching at the bit to read this fantasy, but I just, it hurts my soul a little bit to have to buy this through Amazon. Secret project number 3 is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And I did like this one. This was like a 4-star read for me. This is another sci-fi fantasy mix-up for Brandon Sanderson with an emphasis on romance. And while this is his most romantic book I think he's written, I still think he really struggles with chemistry and developing a romantic plot line. Like, as a romance reader as well, this is lacking to me personally. It is his most romantic. I will give him credit where that is due, but didn't quite stick the landing for me in terms of the romance development. The sci-fi and fantasy plotline of this is incredible. I really liked that element of this book. Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia was also a 3-star read for me. I don't know what it is, but I haven't really enjoyed a Sylvia Moreno Garcia's, like, her new releases as much. She's still a favorite author for me, and she writes really fun, interesting main characters that are unlikable, and I like unlikable characters, but this one wasn't very scary. I really didn't like the romantic plotline and how that ended in this book. It just was okay, sadly. The Sun and the Void. This is a book that has kind of stirred up a lot of drama, and I have weird mixed feelings about it. So this was pitched to me as a queer South American epic fantasy, kind of historical fantasy take on, like, colonialism, and I was like, oh, that sounds incredible. And then there was a lot of, like, discussion of, like, ableism in this book, and specifically there was a person on TikTok who went through a heart transplant herself, and there is a part of the plot of this book is this main character gets a heart transplant, like a magical heart transplant, and she calls it like a curse, and like part of her died that day, and so this real person, like, had a really hard time with that because of her personal experience having a heart transplant, which literally saved her life. But here's the thing. It depends on how that is addressed later in the book. If the main character learns to accept that she is disabled and has this transplant and stuff like that. So I'm interested in reading it still and seeing how the execution of the plot of the disability plotline plays out, but there was just a lot of heat on this book. I'm tentative, I'm cautious about going into this one. There's also something to be said about coming down really hard on debut POC authors, and I don't want to contribute to that. So I think I'm still gonna read this one and put my 2 cents in just to see how that disability plotline plays out. I don't think we should cancel a book because there is something problematic in it necessarily. Like, if the main character starts out hating her disability and really ableist in her head and then grows to accept and become non-ableist, like, characters should be able to learn and grow, you know what I mean? So all that to say, this one is, like, tentative for me. A couple of books that I thought were coming out this year that ended up getting pushed to next year are Heavenly Tyrant by Xiranjie Zhao. This was book 2 after Iron Widow, a young adult sci-fi dystopian, and you should look this one up. as to why it got pushed. Basically, the author has come out and talked about the publishing industry and how effed up it is with their pay and how they pay their authors, and that's essentially why this book got pushed. Look that up if you're interested, but I am still highly anticipating this when it does come out. The Mirrored Heavens by Rebecca Roanhorse. I think this also got pushed. This is the third book in the, I can't remember what the series is called, but the first book is Black Sun by this author, and I'm eagerly anticipating this final book in the series, and I think it did also get pushed. Then we have Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, and this was a T. Kingfisher release that I really did enjoy. This is a kind of a spin on a fairy tale, and I thought it was well done. This gave like really great vibes, and I had a good time with it, and this was a solid T. Kingfisher. Then we have Secret Project number 4, The Sunlit Man by Brandon Sanderson. Came out in October, and this was another Sanderson I didn't super love, but it is the most Cosmere of all the secret projects, so I appreciated it for that. But this one was just okay for me. Nothing more to say on that. I put System Collapse by Martha Wells on this list, but I crossed it out because I did read all 6 installments of the Murderbot series that are out, and the full-length novel in this series like really disappointed me, and I was kind of on the fence whether or not I wanted to continue, and this is another full-length novel. And so I think personally I'm just kind of done with the series. I think the novellas in this book or in this series are incredible and a lot of fun, but the full-length novel just didn't work for me at all. So I appreciate the series, but I think I'm not going to continue anymore. The last book on my list is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, which I loved Legends and Lattes. This one was just okay. The nature of it being a prequel is that a lot of the character relationships that are formed in here, you know where Viv, our main character, is at in Legends and Lattes, and so you know that a lot of these relationships don't last, so this feels a little meaningless to me. Was the plot a little bit more plot heavy? Yes, in this book. It just didn't quite land as much as Legends and Lattes for that reason. The number of books I read or did not finish was 21. There were 7 books that were either moved to 2024 or completely removed from my list to read. That was 7. And there are 12 books that were on this list that are still on my list to read. So total, I read or removed 28 out of 40 anticipated releases, which means I have a 70% completion rate for the list of anticipated books that I was able to finish, DNF, or move to next year, which I think is pretty great. Last year, I think I had a little bit less of a completion rate, but this year I did a pretty good job of balancing new releases with older titles, not from this year. This is one of my favorite videos to film and talk about and look at the year in terms of anticipated releases, and I can't wait to do this again next year. What was your favorite 2023 release? I would love to know. I think of this list, what was my favorite? I'm gonna say The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi was my favorite new release of 2023. Off the top of my head, that's the book I'm gonna say. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye!